You are single. You have freedom. You have time. No obligations carved into your schedule by someone else's needs. And yet, you are falling behind. Not dramatically, but in the quiet, accumulating way that drift produces. In the way that every week looks approximately the same as the last. In the way that the years pass and the distance between where you are and where you said you would be keeps growing rather than shrinking. This is not a speech about how bad you are. This is an honest look at the specific mistake the majority of single men are making in 2026. The mistake converting what should be the most powerful developmental window of their lives into time that passes without compounding, into freedom that costs more than it gives, because they never understood what freedom was actually for. Most single men are not building leverage, they are wasting optionality. And those two things, wasting optionality and building leverage, are not just different outcomes. They are different trajectories, different directions. One of them compounds in your favor, the other one compounds against you. And the gap between them, invisible in any single week, becomes unmistakable after 2 years, devastating after 5. Today, you are going to understand the mistake, and you are going to have no excuse for making it anymore. Most single men are not building leverage, they are wasting optionality. And those two things are not just different outcomes, they are different trajectories. One of them compounds in your favor, the other one compounds against you. And the gap between them, invisible in any single week, becomes unmistakable after 2 years, devastating after 5. Think about what freedom actually is. Freedom is the absence of external constraint. It is the removal of the obligations, compromises, and competing demands that a shared life imposes. And that removal creates space, time, energy, attention that is not claimed by another person's needs or a shared structure's requirements. That space is real, it is genuine. It is one of the few things in adult life that is genuinely hard to reclaim once it is gone. But space is not value. Space is possibility, and possibility, in the absence of direction, does not produce outcomes. It just sits there, empty, getting filled by whatever is easiest, whatever is most immediately available, whatever requires the least resistance. And in 2026, the things that require the least resistance are not the things that build a man. They are the things that sedate him. Drift versus direction. This is the binary that everything else hangs on. The drifting single man is often working, often busy, often doing fine by surface measures. But his energy is not organized toward anything. His weeks do not have a vector. He is moving forward in time, but not toward anything, not building, not compounding. Each week, approximately the cost of the last, and the accumulation of weeks produces not a foundation, but a plateau. The directed single man is different, not because he has some special talent or unusual discipline or a life free of distraction, but because he has decided explicitly and consciously that the time he has available is capital, that it has a return on investment, that spending it without intention is not a neutral act, it is a loss, and that decision, the decision to treat freedom as a raw material rather than a reward, changes everything about what he does with his days. Passive entertainment versus active construction. The daily choice that separates the single man who arrives at 35 with genuine leverage from the one who arrives exactly where he was at 28, just more tired. One was building, the other was occupying time. Freedom amplifies who you already are. Disciplined, freedom makes you more disciplined. Undirected, freedom makes you more sedated. The disciplined single man and the distracted single man are not separated by circumstance. They are separated by a decision that most men never consciously make because they never consciously recognize that they have to make it. Now let us look at why the distracted version is so easy to fall into. Because it is not a failure of character. It is a response to an environment designed to produce exactly this outcome. You live in 2026, the most sophisticated attention extraction environment ever constructed. Every platform you touch is the product of a company whose business model depends on holding your attention as long as possible, regardless of whether your time there produces anything of value for you. The algorithm does not care about your financial independence. The feed does not care about your trajectory. Dating apps are designed to feel productive. They create the sensation of forward motion, of pursuing, of exploring, of being in the game, while structurally preventing the kind of deep investment that produces an actual outcome. Swiping feels like searching. Matching feels like progress. But the compulsion loop keeping you checking and refreshing is keeping you in a state of perpetual low-grade, romantic stimulation that substitutes for the real experience of building something. Social media, dopamine cycles, gaming, streaming, digital escape. These are the ambient texture of the distracted single man's life. As the default, as what happens in the spaces between the things that nominally matter. Those spaces, the evenings, the weekends, the long Sunday mornings, are not trivial. They are where the real work of building a man happens, or does not happen. You think you are exploring. You think the scrolling, the swiping, the binge watching are decompression, the freedom you are entitled to as a man without obligations. But what you are actually doing is numbing the productive discomfort that ambition requires. Ambition is not comfortable. Building something is not comfortable. Every time you reach for the phone, instead of tolerating the discomfort of genuine effort, you are training yourself to avoid the very thing that produces growth. Short-term gratification is a compound interest problem in reverse. The consistent substitution of immediate stimulation for delayed reward produces a brain progressively less capable of sustained effort, less tolerant of discomfort. That erosion does not announce itself. It just slowly makes the building feel harder. The long game feel less compelling than the next available distraction. Now let us go to the biological layer. The distraction problem is not just environmental. It is also biological. Men are wired for pursuit. This is not a cultural construct. Men evolved under conditions that rewarded drive, competition, relentless orientation toward an objective. The dopamine hit that comes from achievement rather than consumption. These are the operating principles of a nervous system built for constant, active engagement with challenging objectives. In the ancestral environment, the male drive had a natural outlet, genuine competitive hierarchy, physical challenges, real survival demands. In the modern environment, those outlets are gone. The survival challenges have been removed. The competitive hierarchy is abstract. And so the male pursuit drive goes looking for something to pursue. It finds the nearest available stimulus, the dating app, the game, the social media feed, the next scroll. Dopamine tied to achievement, not consumption. When you are actively pursuing something real, your dopamine system is engaged the way it was designed. Achievement-based dopamine produces drive. Consumption-based dopamine produces the desire for more consumption. It habituates quickly. You need more stimulation to get the same effect. That is the pharmacology of addiction. And most single men are running it. When you are consuming, scrolling, watching, swiping, The dopamine release is real, but shallow. It does not produce drive. It produces the desire for more consumption. It is self-reinforcing in the wrong direction. And more dangerously, it habituates quickly. The same input produces less response over time, which means you need more stimulation to get the same effect, which is the exact pharmacology of addiction. When pursuit disappears, stagnation begins. The single man who has replaced genuine pursuit of excellence, of skill, of physical development, of financial independence, with the pseudo pursuit of digital stimulation is not just wasting time. He is degrading the neurological machinery that would allow him to genuinely pursue anything. He is making it harder with each passing month to do the thing that his situation uniquely positions him to do. Pursuing women versus pursuing excellence. The man who pursues excellence becomes genuinely attractive as a byproduct. The man who pursues women without the foundation of genuine excellence becomes progressively less attractive as a byproduct. The direction matters enormously, and the direction that compounds in the right direction always starts with building the self. In the ancestral environment, the male pursuit drive had a natural outlet, genuine competitive hierarchy, physical challenges, real survival demands. In the modern environment, those outlets are gone, and so the drive goes looking for something to pursue. It finds the nearest available stimulus, the dating app, the game, the social media feed, the next scroll, and the drive that was built for conquest gets absorbed by consumption. Many single men are chasing attention instead of building substance, not because they are vain, but because the attention economy has created a system where the simulation of status is constantly available, immediately rewarding, and far easier to access than the actual thing. And the human brain, particularly the status competitive male brain, often cannot tell the difference between the simulation and the real thing until it is too late. Flexing without foundation. The profile carefully curated to project a version of a man the day-to-day reality does not yet support. These are not just harmless performances. They are the substitution of the signal for the substance. And when you substitute the signal for the substance, you get the psychological rewards of the substance without doing the work, which means you do not do the work. The performance becomes the ceiling rather than the floor. Flexing without foundation. The profile carefully curated to project a version of a man the day-to-day reality does not yet support. These are the substitution of the signal for the substance. When you substitute the signal for the substance, you get the psychological rewards of the substance without doing the work, which means you do not do the work. Constant messaging without direction. The hours spent in conversations that exist primarily to sustain the sensation of being in contact with someone. This is not connection. This is the simulation of connection, and it consumes the time that could be building the actual foundation that genuine connection requires. Attention without achievement weakens discipline. Every hit of social validation, not attached to genuine achievement, trains your reward system to expect reward without effort, and this connects to something that needs to be examined directly: the illusion of options, because one of the dominant narratives of the single man in the dating app era is that he has abundance, that the access to options that modern technology provides represents genuine leverage, that having matches and conversations and the theoretical availability of connection across a wide field constitutes a position of power. It does not. Or rather, it does not automatically, and for most men, it does not at all. Dating apps create perceived abundance, but perceived options are not real leverage. Surface access versus deep connection, quantity versus quality, ego inflation versus real status. These are entirely different things. If everyone has options, options are no longer power. Every man in your demographic has the same swipe access, which means access itself is not differentiated. What is differentiated is what you have actually built. Surface access means you can initiate contact with a large number of people. It does not mean you are genuinely competitive in the markets you're trying to access. Access is not leverage. Access is proximity to the starting line. What happens from there depends entirely on what you have built. Ego inflation versus real status. The man who has inflated his ego on the validation of matches without building the real foundation will encounter the gap between his self-perception and his actual standing at some point. In the real world, in physical spaces, in genuine social environments, status is not optional. It is visible. It is the product of everything you actually are, not just the version you present on a curated profile. If everyone has options, options are no longer power. Every man in your demographic has the same swipe access. Access itself is not differentiated. What is differentiated is what you have actually built, who you actually are, what your presence communicates about your trajectory and your quality. Those things are still scarce, precisely because most men are spending their single years in distracted drift. And this leads us to the drift pattern itself, because it has a specific shape, and once you see the shape, you recognize it everywhere. And hopefully you recognize it before it has consumed too many of your high leverage years. The drift pattern: work, scroll, chase, repeat, not occasionally, as the default cycle. The work provides income and minimal forward motion. The scroll provides stimulation. The chase provides the feeling of being in the game without the requirement of building anything. Then repeat: no long-term mission, no compounding advantage, no skill getting progressively more developed. Just the same inputs, producing the same outputs, with the calendar moving forward, but the man staying in place. There is no long-term mission in the drift pattern. There is no compounding advantage being built. There is no skill that is getting progressively more developed. There is no physical standard that is being raised. There is no financial foundation that is being strengthened. There are just the same inputs, producing approximately the same outputs, week after week, with the calendar moving forward, but the man essentially staying in place. This is the compounding deficit principle. Every week in the drift pattern is a week in which the compounding curve that should operate in your favor is operating against you. The world is not standing still. The standard is rising. The skills gap between you and the men who are building is widening. Every week, quietly. The man who drifts for 3 years does not return to his starting point when he decides to build. He starts from behind, because the standard moved while he stood still. And here is the catastrophic math. The man who drifts for 3 years does not return to his starting point when he decides to start building. He starts from behind because the standard has moved forward while he was standing still. The catch-up cost of 3 years of drift is more than 3 years of effort, because the men he is competing with did not pause while he drifted. They compounded. And compounding creates gaps that take longer to close than they took to open. This is where most single men lose years, not in dramatic failure. In the quiet, comfortable, entirely avoidable accumulation of weeks in the drift pattern. Now let us talk about the specific corrections that interrupt it. The first correction: replace entertainment with skill stacking. A deliberate reallocation of the hours currently going into passive consumption. Skill stack. By the third or fourth year of genuine skill investment, You are in possession of something most people do not have and cannot quickly replicate. That is leverage. That is what the drifting man trades for the next episode. The second correction: build financial runway before lifestyle inflation. Visible markers without real financial foundation are performance with a running cost. Every dollar going into performing success is a dollar not going into the runway that genuine independence requires. Build the emergency fund. Build the investment portfolio. The man with financial runway has real options. The third correction: train physically like you are still competing, not maintaining, like there are real stakes. Physical training is not just about the body. It is about the relationship you have with your own commitments. The man who shows up when he does not feel like it, who holds the standard when no one is watching, that man is developing the most fundamental form of self-trust, and self-trust is the foundation of everything else. The fourth correction: limit validation-seeking behaviors. Audit the ways you are getting your sense of value from external sources, and ask honestly whether those sources are producing genuine development or just the feeling of it. The man whose self-worth is a function of external validation is always one bad day of engagement away from feeling worthless. The man who builds his value from actual achievements has internal self-worth that does not fluctuate with the algorithm. The fifth correction: structure your weeks with intention. Intentional structure, the deliberate design of your week around the outcomes you are trying to produce, is the operating system of the directed single man, not a rigid schedule, a framework with recurring commitments to the things that matter: training, skill development time, financial management, a framework that makes the default the right thing rather than the easiest thing. Clear corrections, fast pacing, build skills, build runway, train seriously, limit the validation loop, structure your weeks. These are not suggestions. These are the operational commitments of the single man who understands what this time is actually for. Now let us go to the power dynamics of the dating market, because there is a structural reality here that most men either do not know or avoid looking at. Value in dating is asymmetrical. Women select across and up. Men must build up. The single man who is drifting, average in his development, his financial position, his physical condition, is not just average in an abstract sense. He is invisible in the market he is trying to compete in. Not because he is a bad person, but because the market does not reward averageness. It rewards distinction, and distinction is the product of building. What this means in practical terms is that the single man who is drifting is not just average in an abstract sense. He is invisible in the market he is trying to compete in. Not because he is a bad person, but because the market does not reward averageness. It rewards distinction. And the man who has not differentiated himself through genuine development does not register as the kind of attraction he is looking for. Single men who drift become invisible. In a dating market characterized by abundance of access and scarcity of genuine quality, the man who has not differentiated himself through genuine development does not register as attraction. The quality of what he has access to is determined by the quality of what he has built. And the man who has built nothing has a very limited foundation. Single men who build become selective. The man who is genuinely developed, physically strong, financially capable, professionally competent, psychologically grounded, does not need to pursue desperately because the quality of what comes to him has changed. His selectivity is not a strategy. It is the natural byproduct of genuine value. He can afford to say no because his yes carries weight. And the man whose yes carries weight operates in a completely different relational reality. Selection power belongs to the rare, not to those who perform rareness, to those who are actually rare. And rareness is built, not claimed. Now let us address something that the culture around single men almost never addresses honestly: the emotional dimension, the inner experience of singlehood that sits underneath all the strategic advice and the tactical rules and the building narrative. Loneliness is real. It is present for most single men at some point, and the way you respond to it will, more than almost anything else, determine what kind of man you become. Loneliness is not weakness, it is a signal. And the question is what you do with the signal: time, mobility, risk tolerance, low obligation. These are the four resources the single man has in greater abundance than at almost any other point in his adult life. The window does not stay open indefinitely, and the man who drifts through it will find himself on the other side, wondering where it went. And the question, the critical question, is what you do with the signal. Social isolation versus productive solitude. Social isolation is involuntary aloneness experienced as deprivation. Productive solitude is voluntary aloneness in service of something, the condition that allows depth of focus and genuine self-development. The man who can convert social isolation into productive solitude, who can take the discomfort of being alone and turn it into the fuel for building, has made one of the most powerful psychological moves available. Loneliness is not weakness. It is a signal. The discomfort of being alone, the quiet moments that feel too quiet, the evenings that feel empty, is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are human. It is a sign that your nervous system is calibrated for connection. The discomfort of loneliness is not a diagnosis. It is a signal. And the question is what you do with it: escaping loneliness versus transforming it. The escaping man reaches for the nearest distraction and calls it coping, but he is preventing the productive pressure of loneliness from doing its work, releasing the valve before the pressure can drive anything. The transforming man sits with the discomfort long enough for it to point him toward building, toward genuine connection, toward the actual development of the self. Now let us make the philosophical distinction that determines everything that follows from here: the distinction between love and escapism. Because some men pursue relationships not from the genuine desire for connection, but from the desire to escape the pressure of their own development. And that distinction, while invisible from the outside, determines the entire trajectory of what gets built. Some men pursue relationships to escape self-development pressure. The dynamic works like this. The man who is not building feels the accumulating pressure of that drift. And rather than confronting that pressure directly, rather than turning it into fuel for building, he seeks to dissolve it in the warmth of attachment, in the comfort of having someone, in the relief of feeling chosen and temporarily absolved of the responsibility of building the kind of man worth choosing. Attachment out of fear versus attachment out of strength. The man who attaches out of fear is bringing a deficit. He is asking the relationship to provide the security and meaning that should come from his own genuine development. Relationships cannot do that work. They can sustain a genuinely built man. They cannot substitute for the building. The man who enters from strength brings surplus, and surplus is what genuine partnership is built from. Enter relationships from surplus, not scarcity. The relationship entered from scarcity becomes an obligation rather than a choice, a need rather than a want. And both people in a relationship entered from scarcity feel the weight of that, even if neither of them can name it. Now let us talk about the window, the time dimension that the drifting man is not accounting for. Single years are high leverage years, not because being single is inherently valuable. We established that at the beginning, but because the structural conditions of singlehood are uniquely conducive to certain kinds of investment that become significantly harder to make as life becomes more complex. Time, mobility, risk tolerance, low obligation. These are the four resources that the single man has in greater abundance than he will have at almost any other point in his adult life. Time to invest in deep skill development. Time to build the financial foundation without competing demands. Time to invest in physical development with the consistency that produces real change. Mobility to take the professional opportunity elsewhere. To take the calculated risk that single life makes survivable. Low obligation to move when moving is the right decision. Risk tolerance. This is the one the drift is most aggressively wasting. The single man can afford to fail in ways the man with a mortgage and dependents cannot. He can try the business idea. He can change careers. He can bet on himself because the downside is manageable. The man who does not make those bets during the window when they are affordable will find himself making safer and safer choices, slowly becoming a more careful and less alive version of the man he meant to be. This window closes faster than you think, not in the dramatic way of a door slamming, but in the gradual way that obligations accumulate weight, and the clean freedom of the single man's life becomes the complex reality of a built life. The man who drifts through it will find himself on the other side wondering where it went. The man who used it will find himself on the other side grateful for what he built. Let us talk about identity, because underneath all of the tactical advice and the strategic framing and the market dynamics and the leverage principles, there is a question of who you actually are, who you are choosing to be, what kind of man you are constructing during this period of your life. Singlehood is a construction phase, not a waiting phase, not a between phase, a period of active, intentional building of the man you are going to spend the rest of your life being. The skills you develop now are the skills you bring to everything that comes after. The physical condition you build now is the foundation of the decades ahead. All of this is construction. All of this is the identity you are building. Construction phase, expansion phase, network phase, skill accumulation phase. These are the architecture of a man's identity in formation. The man who treats his single years as all of these simultaneously emerges genuinely different. Not just older, more capable, more confident, more worth knowing, more worth choosing. Default mode versus intentional mode. These are the two available operating systems for the single man. Default mode is the mode of least resistance. Work, scroll, chase, repeat, comfortable, familiar. The path most men take. Producing an ordinary life and the gradual accumulation of regret that comes from knowing you had the time and the freedom and did not use them. But intentional mode produces something that default mode never produces. It produces a man who is genuinely proud of who he has become. Not proud of his performance, not proud of what he tells people about his life, proud of the actual reality, of the actual standard, of the actual distance he has traveled in the direction of the man he intended to be. And now we arrive at the end, and I want it to be clean. I want it to be direct, and I want it to be the kind of thing that you cannot unhear. You have two ways to use this time, two ways to use the freedom, the time, the optionality that singlehood provides, only two. There is no third option. There is no middle path that keeps the comfort and produces the outcome. You can use singlehood as escape. You can scroll, chase validation, and numb the productive discomfort of ambition with the endless menu of stimulation the modern world provides. And at some point down the road, you will find yourself in a life that is comfortable and mediocre and entirely the product of the choices you made during the time when the compound interest of those choices was most powerful. Or you can use singlehood as acceleration. Decide right now that every day of unencumbered freedom is a day in the construction of something real. Build skills while the distracted men scroll. Train while the comfortable men choose convenience. Invest while the spenders perform. Develop the psychological depth that most men will never have because they were too busy escaping the discomfort that development requires. Being single is not the problem. Wasting it is. The singlehood itself is neutral. The man who drifts through it and the man who builds through it occupy the same relationship status, but they occupy completely different futures. And the gap between those futures is enormous. And it is entirely the product of what each man chose to do with the same raw material. Build while others scroll. Train while others chase validation. Position while others drift. That is not a slogan. That is a description of the actual competitive landscape. Most single men are drifting, which means the man who is building is not competing against a field of equals. He is competing against a field of distracted men who are voluntarily, cheerfully, continuously removing themselves from the competition by choosing comfort over construction. The opportunity is real. The window is open, but it does not stay open. Do not be average. You have everything you need to be more than that. The time, the freedom, the unallocated potential of a man who has not yet built everything he is going to build. The question is not whether you are capable. The question is whether you are going to choose it. Choose it before the window closes, before the drift becomes your identity, before the man you were supposed to become is replaced by the man you became by default. The choice is now. The time is yours. Use it or lose it.